Welcome to Above and Beyond with Laura Smith, the show that takes you above and beyond with the world's most transformational thinkers, top celebrity psychics, mediums, and astrologers. Call in now for a free reading. 800-848-WABC. That's 800-848-9222. Let's go above and beyond. Here's Laura Smith.
Welcome to the show. As always, it means it's a Sunday at 7 p.m., and I hope you are enjoying this incredible weather we've had finally today. It feels like the first warm day in about 8 months in New York City, and it was just stupendous. Well, I'm so grateful to be here tonight, as always, and as I said, as Jake said, Jake Hirsch, who opened the show, and I thank him so much for doing so. You can go to protunes.com to find out how you can have him voice your project or your product. That's Jake Hirsch. We do have the Manhattan Medium back in the house because, as you know, I've been telling you that he's traveling all over the planet with his brand new book, Never Argue with a Dead Person, True Enough Unbelievable Stories from the Other Side. And so he will be back taking your calls in about 15 minutes or so. But I am so very honored, grateful. I'm kind of giddy, actually. I have a dear friend who is going to open up the show, and I know he'll transform your world when you hear from him and also read his books. He's a modern-day spiritual messenger and author of 28 books. They've been translated into 37 languages. 7 of them have made it to the New York Times bestseller list, some of them for even more than 2 years. The first 3 were a worldwide phenomenon, and I don't know, I mean, almost everybody I know has heard of them or read the first 3 volumes, but he has so many of them. Conversations with God. Ring a bell? Volumes 1, 2, and 3. Well, he's here tonight, and his latest book, God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong, was just released about 6 months ago. So without another word, I just want to welcome to my program the wonderful Neale Donald Walsch. Neale, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's very nice to be here, and what a nice introduction. You're very kind. Thank you.
Well, yes, I had the great pleasure and privilege to work with you years ago on national radio, and you had your own show, and as you say, we used to play radio back then, but really you are so much more. You're a global teacher, thinker, writer, and basically a messenger. And for people who have never heard of the series, which I can't even fathom, I mean, it's in 37 languages all over the world, for people who are not familiar with Conversations with God, and even if they are, it's great to hear from them again. Tell us just a little 101 on what those books were and how it started the whole movement.
Well, nothing in my life was working, Laura, at the time that I had that experience, which I call a conversation with God. My life was falling apart, actually, at every level. My work life was falling apart, and my health was falling apart, my relationships were falling apart. Really nothing was working. And one night at 4:25 in the morning, I woke up and I just began pacing the house back and forth. I was furious with life, furious with myself for doing what I did not know was wrong. I had no idea. I just kept on asking myself, what is it I don't understand? What have I done here? Why do I have to keep living a life of such continuing struggle? And then I just kind of called out to God. I just said, okay, because if you don't have any answers for me, I'm really through. I don't want to play anymore. And at that point, I heard a voice, literally a voice in the room. It was a physical voice. I could have sworn someone was there. It's now 4:40 in the morning. And the voice said, Neale, do you really want answers to all of these questions, or are you just venting? Call it my imagination, call it what you will, but it was real to me. I turned around. There was no one there, of course, but I answered kind of to the wind. If you've got answers, I'd sure as heck like to know what they are. And with that, I began writing a very angry letter to God. I found a yellow legal pad on the coffee table in front of me, happened to be there. I picked it up, and I began writing a very angry letter to God. What does it take to make life work? And what have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? Mm-hmm. And tell me the rules. Just give me the rule book. I promise I'll play, but just give me the rule book. And after you give me the rule book, don't change the rules. Because I had the experience as well that life's rules were changing day to day, month to month, year to year. So that's how it all began, because I began hearing answers to those questions in my mind, and I wrote them down very, very quickly. Soon I was involved in a question-answer dialogue that morning of my life that went on for 3 or 4 hours. And every day thereafter, at 4:25 or 4:30 in the morning, I would wake up and I would just return to that dialogue until I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of handwritten pages of dialogue. And finally, somewhere in that dialogue, Laura, it said, this will one day become a book. And I said to myself, of course, you and 100 other people are going to send your middle-of-the-night mental meanderings to a publisher who's going to say, we've got to get this out at once. This man's talking to God. Mm-hmm. But in fact, as it happened, that's exactly what happened, what occurred. I sent it to a publisher really on a dare. I was daring myself, daring God, if you please. We'll see about that was my attitude. So I did send it to a publisher, and I'll be doggone if he didn't actually publish it. And the book took off and sold millions of copies.
And changed millions. Yes, and changed millions of lives. I picked up that volume. First of all, it almost jumped off of the shelf at me at the bookstore. And when I started to read it, it literally took me one paragraph in, and it felt like my head was blowing up. I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is the truth, the message that I've always known was there somewhere, but nobody had ever kind of said it like that. And I just remember feeling completely transformed, elated, full of joy, full of happiness, full of wonderment, because it makes you think. It's not just all roses and puppies. I mean, this is really deep, very, not esoteric, but real heady stuff, and questions that almost, I think, are universal. You were asking the questions, you were venting in a way that I think so many millions of people do, but here it was, the answers to some of those questions. It was truly unbelievable. I could read them, all over again, the whole series, and then some. But what happened when you did that? Did it occur to you that you were actually having a conversation with God? I mean, at that point, were you convinced, or did you think maybe you were losing your mind or something?
No, actually, very, very soon after the experience began, I really was convinced. Other people don't have to be. I've never asked anyone to necessarily embrace my notion of what occurred as their own idea, but I am absolutely clear that God is speaking. First of all, I'm clear that God exists. Secondly, I'm clear that God is speaking to us, all the time, in 1,000 different ways across 1 billion moments in 1 million lifetimes and beyond. And so I'm pretty clear now that God is always talking with us. In a wide variety of ways. The billboard in the next corner when you turn the car, a chance utterance of a friend on the street, the lyrics of the next song you hear on the radio, or perhaps a voice in the middle of the night answering the questions you've always wanted to know the answers to. So I'm convinced that I've had a conversation with God. I'll tell you why, Laura, because the answers I was getting were answers I never would have brought to myself if I had been reaching into my own mental reservoir of understanding and awareness. Answers that I never, ever dreamt of. So things were coming across the page that shocked even me, and that's why I'm convinced that it came from some exterior place.
Well, and when you read it, that's exactly how it feels. That was my experience for sure. In your latest book, God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong. Please divulge. What is it that God is trying to tell us? What did we get wrong, and what are we still getting wrong about Him, about it?
Just about everything that most people believe about God. I have a true or false quiz on the back of the book, which really summarizes most of it. We have these understandings about God, and I have a true or false quiz. God is to be feared, true or false? God exists and is a superhuman male being, true or false? God demands obedience, true or false? God requires us to believe in God and to worship God in a specific way, true or false? God is vengeful, and God's love can turn to wrath on a moment's notice, true or false? God's forgiveness is required for us to get into heaven. God has a plan for us. God is on our side. God honors self-sacrifice, long-suffering, preferably in silence, and martyrdom. God sometimes answers our prayers and sometimes does not. God will reward us or punish us on Judgment Day. And the list goes on and on. A list of questions that kind of put together summarize the beliefs of billions and billions of people across a wide variety of faiths on the planet about this thing that we call God. And the book indicates that every one of those statements is false. Those are all
every one of them. Every
single one, including the statements that we would imagine would be true. God wants us to return to heaven. God is separate from us, and so on and so forth. So what the book does is it answers, however, a series of what-if questions. It simply places before the reader an interesting inquiry. What if these statements were false? Would it change anything in the way we live our lives on the planet and the way we live our individual lives? You see, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question here, Laura, on the earth. How is it possible for nearly 8 billion people to all want the same thing, peace, health, prosperity, love, all the things we all want, and be unable to get it? We're supposed to be an evolved species. How come 8 billion people all want the same thing and can't produce the outcome, except for the tiniest minority of people, and even those people can't hang on to it? Is it possible, just possible, I ask, that there's something we don't fully understand here about God and about life, the understanding of which would change everything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine so. And a lot of the keys to this in this new book. Now, is the latest book also, would you consider it sort of channeled with the answers from God, or is this more of your accumulated knowledge that you've had over writing all these books over all these years?
I think it's a little bit of both. First of all, I never channel God. I'll just quarrel just briefly with the word that you use, channeling. I think I'm like an inspired writer. I don't believe that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John channeled God. I don't think that people who write with insight about spiritual matters are necessarily channeling, even if they bring forth the first-person voice of God in certain instances. But I do think there's a process called inspired writing. I think that's the process behind all creation. Mozart was inspired. Michelangelo was inspired, and I believe that I was inspired, and so are many, many, many millions of other people as well. But these writings in this latest book are a combination of inspired writing, where I really believe that God again is speaking through me, to me, at me, and so forth to the readers, and also an accumulation of all the information I've received through the past 20 years as I've dealt with this phenomenon that I've called Conversations with God.
This sort of it doesn't replace religion, but it is not religion, is it? It's
spirituality. It relies not on someone else's dogma, which religion relies on, someone else's doctrine, someone else's dogma, but it relies on one's personal, first-person experience of God. As a matter of fact, the books indicate that don't believe a word of this. Do not believe a word that you're reading here. It says, just go to your own experience, allow yourself to be your own authority in the matter. You will discover soon enough, if you trust your own inner authority, that there is an essential essence in the universe that we might call God, freedom, love, life itself, whatever word you want to use to describe that ineffable essence that flows in, as, and through everything, and rely on that, and the answers to all of your problems, to all of your personal questions will be given to you. And when you rely on those answers and follow the answers that you're given, you'll find your life changing virtually overnight.
And something tells me that there would be a whole lot more peace on the planet, in the world, and amongst us if maybe we could break down some of those barriers with some of the more universal themes. Neale, you also give many workshops. You lead trips to places like Machu Picchu and all these wonderful things. Where can people find you? CWGconnect.com. CWG, of course, for Conversations with God. So people can get in touch with me very quickly at CWGconnect.com. And also, I believe, NealeDonaldWalsch.com gets people to you as well, and they can see your beautiful face as well. Neale, this has been such a tip of the iceberg. I am just so grateful that you came on. Promise me that we'll do it again, but we'll take a lot more time and really get into the nitty-gritty. I'm so grateful to you for your inspiration, writing these books, and the humility that it takes to put them out there and to take that leap of faith and then and change so many lives. You've really blessed me with these books, and I thank you so very much.
You're a very kind person. Thank you, Laura. It's nice to be here. And yes, of course, I'd love to come back and spend some more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too. My guest again, Neale Donald Walsch, the best-selling author of 28 books, the first 3 which were Conversations with God, volumes 1, 2, and 3, and the very latest, God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong. Go get it. I'll tell you what, it is life-changing stuff, and I am I'm kind of speechless, which is, for somebody in radio, probably not a good thing, but so grateful to Neale Donald Walsch. Go to his website, CWGconnect.com, CWGconnect.com, and that's for Conversations with God. This is Above and Beyond with Laura Smith. When we come back, we'll be taking your phone calls. Why? Well, because the Manhattan medium, Thomas John, is back in the house before he's off on his national tour with his new book. So join us, 800-848-WABC, 800-848-9222 from the NJDiet.com studios here high atop Madison Square Garden at 77 WABC. We'll be taking your phone calls. Don't go away. It's Above and Beyond with Laura Smith.